Help me reach 1,000 subscribes. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every comment. Thanks. I never imagined that a marriage could feel so empty. I thought Michael and I had built something solid, a partnership of trust, love, and shared dreams. We were 29 when we married, both ambitious, both devoted, or at least, I believe we were. For the first few years, everything felt perfect. We had dinners together, spontaneous weekend trips, late-night conversations about life and our hopes. She laughed at my jokes, and I hung on her every word. But then, somewhere along the 5th year, the subtle shifts began. It started small, ignored messages, delayed replies, and a growing distance in her eyes whenever we were in the same room. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. Sarah, my wife, had always been passionate about her career in marketing. I told myself she was tired, preoccupied, juggling deadlines. But the small dismissals slowly turned into a pattern. When I tried to hug her, she stiffened. When I complimented her, she barely smiled. And the nights became a cold reminder of the walls that had quietly grown between us. I tried everything I could think of. I cooked dinner more often, surprised her with flowers, planned small weekend getaways, and even suggested date nights. She accepted politely, but the spark never returned. Her laughter no longer lingered. Her touch no longer lingered. The warmth I had once taken for granted was gone, replaced by silence and cold indifference. Every day, I felt smaller, invisible in my own home, like a ghost sharing a space with someone I no longer recognized. For months, I wrestled with my own guilt. Was I not attentive enough? Was I too busy with work? Did I fail her somehow? I replayed every interaction, every argument, every casual glance that might have hurt her, searching for answers that never came. And the more I tried, the more the distance grew. I could see it in her eyes. The patience was gone, the affection was gone, and the love we had once shared seemed buried under layers of apathy. One evening, after a particularly long week, I came home with the hope of a quiet dinner together. I set the table, lit candles, and prepared her favorite meal. I smiled when she entered, expecting even a flicker of recognition, maybe a hint of the old warmth. Instead, she nodded briefly, muttered something about being tired, and retreated to the living room with her laptop. I sat across from her, my heart sinking with every passing minute. I tried to start a conversation, to ask about her day, to laugh about something trivial. Nothing. She didn't even look up. I realized then that I was no longer speaking to my wife. I was speaking into a void. The breaking point didn't come with anger or a dramatic fight. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the middle of a Tuesday evening. I had left a note on the kitchen counter, suggesting we talk, really talk, about us, about our marriage, about the distance that had grown like a shadow over our home. I went to the living room, sat across from her, and gently asked if she would consider opening up. She looked at me, her eyes flat, and said, "I don't know if I even care anymore." Her words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any shouting match ever could. At that moment, clarity struck me. I realized that waiting for her to care, to reignite something that had clearly died months ago, was like trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. Nothing I did would change her mind. Nothing I did would bring her warmth back. I felt the anger bubbling beneath my skin, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. If she refused to see me, to acknowledge me, to engage with me as a partner, then I had to take control. Not through confrontation, not through pleading, but through action. The next morning, I began small but deliberate steps. I reorganized my schedule, reclaimed spaces in a house that had once felt hers exclusively, and stopped bending myself around her moods. I didn't announce a revolution. I simply lived in a way that reminded her I wasn't a passive participant in a dying marriage. I stopped asking for validation, stopped waiting for her attention, and started asserting my presence. I focused on myself, my routines, my health, my ambitions, my friends. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the air in our home began to shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden epiphany, no cinematic reunion. But as weeks passed, The tension that had thickened the walls between us began to loosen. Sarah noticed. She asked questions, made small gestures, and for the first time in months, she seemed genuinely curious about me again. It was subtle, but it was enough to know that the dynamics had shifted. I had taken control, not by demanding respect, not by forcing affection, but by refusing to let neglect define my life. And that refusal, quiet as it was, planted the seed. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in Sarah that I hadn't seen in months. She lingered slightly longer in the kitchen when I brewed my morning coffee. She asked about my work without glancing at her phone. She even smiled just a little when I joked about something trivial. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to signal that my shift in behavior had caught her attention. For the first time in half a year, I felt like I was no longer invisible in my own home. I didn't rush anything. I kept my focus on myself, maintaining my routines, and reclaiming my confidence. I went to the gym, started working on a side project I'd abandoned, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in weeks. Each small victory reminded me that my life didn't revolve solely around her attention, and each step she noticed, even unconsciously, seemed to spark a flicker of recognition. Then came the evening that truly marked a turning point. I had planned to relax in the living room, reading a book, when she came in and sat across from me on the sofa. She didn't announce herself. She didn't make small talk. She just looked at me and said, "I noticed you've been different lately, more present, more yourself." Her tone was tentative, like she was testing the waters. My heart raced, not from longing, but from the realization that my quiet assertion of self-respect had begun to break through the wall she'd built. I didn't overreact. I simply nodded and smiled. "Thanks," I said. "I realize I can't wait around to be noticed. I have to live in a way that matters to me." She studied me for a moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, the tension between us seemed to soften. The next week was a delicate dance of small steps. I maintained my boundaries while allowing her curiosity and concern to surface naturally. I didn't nag, I didn't demand affection, and I didn't dramatize the months of neglect she had inflicted. I simply existed with clarity and purpose, showing that my value wasn't dependent on her approval. And slowly, she began to respond. She started joining me in the evenings, sitting closer on the couch, asking about my day, and even sharing stories from her work. These were small gestures, but each one was significant. Tiny cracks forming in the wall of indifference she had built. Then, one night, after dinner, she spoke a sentence that felt like a spark in the darkness. "Michael, I've missed this. I've missed us." I froze for a moment, not out of shock, but because I realized just how much power we give to neglect when we allow it to define our lives. I took a deep breath and replied honestly, "I've missed it too, but it's not about missing. It's about recognizing what we've lost and deciding what we're willing to do differently." Her eyes softened, and she reached for my hand. It was tentative at first, almost testing me, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I let her hold it, and in that simple touch, I felt a bridge being rebuilt. Not instantly, not perfectly, but real. I realized then that taking control didn't mean forcing affection or orchestrating reconciliation. It meant refusing to let my worth be dictated by someone else's neglect. It meant choosing to live fully, confidently, and authentically. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere in our home changed. She became more attentive, more communicative, and surprisingly more affectionate. But this time it wasn't out of guilt or obligation. It was out of genuine curiosity and rediscovered respect for the man she had once loved. I noticed a renewed spark in her laughter, a softness in her eyes, and a willingness to engage with me again. And while the past months could never be erased, the present moment allowed us to rebuild, piece by piece, with clearer boundaries and mutual understanding. There were moments of doubt, of course. Old patterns tried to creep back in, but I didn't allow them. Whenever I felt the pull to revert to my old self, pleading, over-apologizing, or seeking validation, I reminded myself that my control, my dignity, and my self-respect were non-negotiable. That quiet insistence became a foundation, not only for my emotional health, but for the renewed bond between us. By the end of the third month, I could honestly say that Sarah and I were closer than we had been in years. The intimacy, both emotional and physical, returned gradually, naturally, as a byproduct of mutual respect and self-awareness. There was no sudden drama, no cinematic reconciliation scene, just a slow, satisfying rebuilding of a relationship that had once been eroded by neglect. Looking back, I realized that the months of being ignored were painful, yes, but they were also transformative. They forced me to confront the uncomfortable truth that my happiness and self-worth couldn't rely on someone else's attention. They taught me that taking control doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means standing firm in your presence and letting your own life shine. In doing so, not only did I reclaim myself, but I also rekindled a connection that had been quietly dying. And as I watched Sarah laughing again at one of my corny jokes, I realized something important. Love doesn't thrive on desperation. It thrives on respect, presence, and authenticity. And by taking control of myself first, I had finally brought it back into our lives. Stronger, steadier, and more genuine than ever before.